Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Leslie Robinson, who has designed an innovative reentry game, Recharge Beyond the Bars, specifically designed to aid the social, emotional, and communication struggles of presently and formerly incarcerated men and women. I met Leslie Robinson last weekend at an event that honored the work of many people who have overcome their past incarceration and now are giving back to their community. Welcome to the show, Leslie.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So, before we talk about Recharge, I'm kind of interested how you got into this space to begin with. What's your background?
So my background is many years ago, I had got a bachelor's in social work, and I went on to work in emergency shelters for runaway and homeless youth, supervise residences for homeless young adults, work with a schizophrenic population in a 900 bed armory with homeless adult and male adults. For 6 years, I put creative arts programs in failing inner city schools. 20 years, I was a consultant for foster care. 2 years, I was a Department of Defense reintegration speaker all across the country with a drawdown from Afghanistan. And importantly, I did a 2 year poetry project at Rikers Island Women's Prison 36 years ago before there were volunteers allowed into prison. So I was the second volunteer ever allowed into Rikers Island. It was a very long process to be allowed in. And it was amazing. I went every 2 weeks, and I worked with 50 to 100 women at a time. The guards would line the room, and we'd kick poetry for 2 hours. And 2 weeks I wasn't there, they'd be writing. I also have a master's in poetry and creative writing. I'm now presently a therapist after studying for 10 years in psychoanalysis. So, my own background, my mother had a lot of emotional struggles, very distant father. I really had nobody to talk to about anything at all, ever, and suffered tremendously because of that. Just had to repress everything. There was never anybody to share anything with, process anything with, have my feelings with. My mother, used to like to say that she was raising orphans with a home. She was a brilliant, brilliant woman, but not really cut out, to be a mother, and she didn't like young children. So due to my own trauma, there was a lot else that I'm just too heavy to get into right now. So due to my own trauma, which led me into this work, obviously, most of us who go into this work, if not all of us, go into it because we have our own significant trauma that we're working through. Um, it just was amazing to me that there was nothing out there to help people to come together in ways that they could have really deep, meaningful conversations to help them process their lives together with people in their own lives, to understand them. Really, our therapeutic model is one-on-one therapy. It doesn't work for the vast majority of people. Probably at least 90% or more people don't ever go into a therapist's office, and they're left out here with nothing to help them to really process their feelings and emotions. So I developed a number of games, quote games, communication resources that help people get really deep into really deep conversations with one another. But there's also a lot of fun mixed in. So, nobody wants to just be having deep conversations for hours, but with fun and activities and drawing and laughter and tears. So it creates this very dynamic interchange where people, if it gets too heavy or they start arguing, like, let's get off this, go into something else. They're on something else. So
So, how do you describe Recharge?
I would describe it as a space. It creates a space for people to deeply process their life experiences and their incarceration experiences with people that they're around all the time. It's used inside about 90 prisons and jails, as well as communities, families, with friends. And I think it would be helpful to read a few questions. Um, so the questions go from light to deep. There's, oops, it would be helpful if I had them all in order, but the questions with the gear, as you can see, are all about incarceration And the questions that don't have a gear, which are a lot, are just about life. They're meaningful questions about life. So you can play with family and friends, and everybody's opening and sharing. So you pick a number card, and there's 6 questions on a card. So it'll be 1 to 6. So I just picked 4. And number 4 is, did you pray while you were incarcerated? If yes, what did you pray for? So if everybody's been incarcerated, they're all going to answer that. A family member might want to answer that as well, what they prayed for while their family member was incarcerated, right? Because just like with veterans, when the service member serves, the family serves. It's the same thing, as we know, when somebody goes to prison, they're in a dangerous situation with a lot of trauma, and the family serves right with them. Everybody answers the same question. So what happens is people start opening and sharing, people who might never have really been that vulnerable ever before and really feeling good about it, because everybody is. And that soft space is it's like a soft landing space, and everybody's speaking their truth around the circle, sharing on whatever it is. Um, Another question, did you lose family members or friends while you were incarcerated? If yes, what was that like? Most people have. That's a very, very painful experience. If you don't get to process that, that can sit inside of you and really eat at you terribly. So if you get to share that, and you know that other people know what you're going through and have been through, it's extremely helpful.
So let me ask this question. So let's say I'm our mutual friend, Jeffrey Deskovic, and you ask, did you pray? If so, what did you pray? And he answers, well, I prayed that somebody would notice that there's DNA that doesn't point to me. How does that help our friend, to be able to answer that and kind of discuss that?
Well, I don't know if Jeffrey really, how, I haven't asked him if he got to really tell people that, he was in for rape and murder. He was wrongfully convicted of rape and murder. And if so, of course, he was a target. I don't know if he really got to share in a safe space with people who are open to really hearing him, that he didn't do it. So I'll actually have to ask him that. But this creates a place where people really are honest and open, and people are in their hearts with each other. So I think that people would have a different experience if he answered that while playing this game with them when they were all vulnerable and opening up, rather than him trying to say, "Oh, I'm in this," I didn't do it, when they'd be like, "Yeah, it would be a different experience."
Yeah. So how did you come up with the idea that the game was a good way to do this?
My first game is called Keep It Real. It's all about life, and that's where the concept for this game, for all the games, comes from. And that came to me fully formed. Like, I didn't sit down to think about a game. It just like came to me with all the categories and everything. So then, because I worked in prisons, um, it made sense to do the same concept, but with questions about incarceration to help people have those conversations.
And one thing that I kind of learned last weekend, like Silverio had the Step to the Line game, and he had a bunch of the people kind of participate. I was hanging back because I was videoing it, but I was watching it, and I was also listening to what Silverio had to say, and it was really interesting. Like at one point, and I actually had Silverio on one of these podcasts earlier that'll be broadcast at some
Mm.
point. But at one point, what he said was, you get these big tough guys, in these level 4 facilities, who have committed these awful crimes, and sometimes these games are enough to get these guys to like break down and cry, and these are big tough guys.
Oh yeah, I've done workshops in maximum security. I actually did one at Rikers Island. I trained all the counselor supervisors by doing a workshop with the game with 10 men in maximum. Yeah, it's kind of magical. It's like if you ask somebody a question directly, immediately defenses go up and think, why are you asking me this and what are you trying to get at, right? But if it's on a card and you roll a dice, you pick a number, you're reading it on a card, you're open, you're excited and interested to hear what the question is. So you're in a completely different state of mind with that. And they were just all sharing really deep things, and it's incredibly beautiful. Yeah, let me read you actually a testimonial from Porter County Sheriff's Department. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Playing this game with my men groups has been nothing but fantastic. There have been times when we laughed so hard we were crying, and other times when men thanked and hugged each other after difficult stories were shared and tears were shed. This game has brought so much healing, encouragement, and unity to the men playing it. I'm often thanked for bringing it into the pods and playing it with them because it brightens their day. So, we're all human beings. People who commit horrendous acts have usually had horrendous acts usually committed against them, and are hurting. So, to be understood, we all want to be understood, right? I don't know anybody who doesn't want to be understood, even if they pretend they don't.
And, I think, you raise a good point, because a lot of people, and we were kind of talking about this before we started this broadcast, a lot of people look at somebody who's committed a horrible crime as being this horrible, evil person. And, there's certainly those who are. I'm not going to say that there aren't, but in my experience, at least, a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are people that have simply had tremendous amounts of trauma, or they're suffering from mental illness, or they're suffering from all sorts of things that have happened to them. And so, you know, the extent to which you can get them to kind of open up and engage with their hurt is actually a way to start them on their road to recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I think, violence is often a last resort when the internal pressure is just unbearable and it's got to be released in some way, right? So I'm not excusing murder by any wild stretch of the imagination, but of course we have to look at the causes. There's in every walk of life, there's a small percentage of evil, right? I mean, evil does exist in the world, but mostly, mostly it's just very traumatized, hurt people. And I've seen people who've committed murder at 16, 17, part of a gang initiation, because that's part of the lifestyle and they're trying to be cool or something. They don't understand what they're doing at the time, come out 30 years later, completely transformed. It's a frightening thing, right? I mean, even I have friends who have committed murder when they were young. It's scary. I mean, of course you can't help but think, how, you don't want to go there. Like, how could somebody, take another person's life? And even service members are completely traumatized because they've killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's complicated. It's complicated, but as you said, yes, I think we all on some level understand why so many Black and brown people are incarcerated.
So, what do you see as the biggest obstacle for those dealing with either current or past incarceration?
Well, that's a big question. Do you mean the biggest emotional obstacle, or tell me what you mean?
Well,
More
I
specific.
mean, just kind of run with it, because I think it could take on a number of different meanings, and it's going to be a little different for you versus me.
Okay. Okay. I'm just going to free associate. I mean, my first thought is self esteem. When, even if you've had a bad day and somebody, for when we're out here and we're successful by society's standards, and somebody like disses us, we're going to be mad or hurt or angry for a little while, right? So you imagine that on a constant basis, day in, day out, almost all the time. I don't know, how do you maintain any kind of self-esteem, and then you don't have skills? If you've been incarcerated, especially a long time, unless few people have had the opportunity to learn some skills and to get degrees. So I would think it would be maintaining your self-esteem, and then being able to have healthy, positive relationships again.
And so, how do you feel like your game can help them with that?
So it brings back fun, innocence, joy, communication, vulnerability, all those things get lost when, for most people, when they're incarcerated, and then they come back and they don't know how to reconnect again with their family. So it just jumpstarts all that. And if you don't have something to jumpstart something, it often goes the opposite direction, and just keeps going in the opposite direction. So I think it's especially important. It's like, it's new. This is a new thing. Most people don't know about it still, and so it's not, it's not like, you're going to pick up a basketball because you know basketball because you played it throughout your childhood. But it's really important. It's really important to jumpstart that reconnecting with people, and people who are using it. It's making a huge difference. Like, they're talking about all kinds of things that wouldn't get brought up otherwise within their families. And as Jeff often says, it asks the questions that people don't know how to ask. So it's very important.
One of the things I often tell my kids is that, everyone is going to have periods of time when they're feeling down, or they don't feel like what they're doing matters, or, stuff isn't going the way that they were planning it
I'm
to
in New York
go.
City, so sorry about the street noise, but go ahead.
um, but, one of the key things I think for a quote unquote healthy person, or a person who's, not incarcerated anyway, is that, they have kind of some resilience. So when things go poorly, they have ways to kind of deal with it. And it seems like people that end up in trouble, it's kind of a cascading effect that, they don't have good self-esteem to begin with, as you mentioned, and then something goes wrong. And so they may have been doing all right, for a while. Like, we had a kid who was suffering from pretty severe depression. And so, he'd go into the hospital for a while, and then he'd come out and he'd be better, but something would always happen. And so as soon as something happened, he didn't have the resilience to be able to handle it. And so he would basically melt down, for lack of a better term. And so I kind of see this as happening with the incarcerated population as well. They just haven't built in enough resilience to be able to kind of take the blows of everyday life.
Yeah, well, a lot of resilience comes from support, right? From having somebody or a number of people you can talk to and let loose and get encouragement from. And so a lot of people don't have that outlet. And yeah, so they internalize everything as something being wrong with them when something happens, and they don't have another voice telling them anything different from that. So yeah, I mean, resilience is super, super important, and it can be developed, but it gets developed through support and through talking about things and through feeling cared about, which is not the experience of most people, many people coming out of prison.
So, how successful have you been at getting this to be accepted by uh, the powers that be in various prisons?
Well, so before the pandemic, the way that I got it out there was going to conferences and community conferences, corrections conferences. So I've sold a few thousand, and it's used in almost every prison in New Jersey, Ohio, in about 25 states. Then, of course, everything stopped during the pandemic. So I got to get back on and let people know this is available. I have some amazing consultants on board now. So we're looking to get it into a lot more prisons now. Um, Unfortunately, there's not like one body that can say this is really great and we're going to put it everywhere. That's not the way it generally works, right? I think you know that. So we're trying to figure it all out. I feel it's been successful. It's being used by thousands of people. So and it's something very different. It's evidence informed, but not evidence based yet. So it's got a ways to go, but I think it's been, and where it's being used is extremely successful. So I've been hundreds of testimonials and support, and yeah.
So is your plan to go prison by prison and try to get it introduced, or
Well,
what's the
like
plan?
with Ohio and New Jersey, the directors of reentry bought a few hundred each, and then they disseminated it throughout the prisons. I actually have not reached out to the directors of reentry in other states, which I will do because I have so much else going on, and a number of other games, to include a game called Streets for gang and street life, a veteran reintegration game, the inclusion game in over 1,000 colleges, and working right now on one for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color to heal together. But anyway, we are working, part of that, the event was about that, to, you know, hopefully get it throughout California. So that's our next plan. A lot of states follow California, as well as to let people know this resource is available to use within their families. So you have the education barrier, right? People, if they don't if they don't use it, they don't understand it. Like when I do trainings and I explain it to the staff or to people, and then they see it in action, they're like, I did not get this at all. I did not understand this at all until they see it in action. So you have that barrier with something completely new. People don't really get it till they see it in action. That's why we're doing the Life After Time video series, which is just starting, lifeaftertime.com. We have one video up right now. It will be hundreds, so that you can see the game in action, as well as you probably saw the video, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So you can see it in action. So people will start saying, oh, okay, right? Because people have to understand what it is. Yeah.
Um, and then kind of explain how the game is played again, because you know, I mean, what's the object of the game, at least that you present to them?
The object is for people to have a safe space to share, to be honest, to be able to transform their experiences with people, compassionate other people, through talking about it, the same thing that therapy does, right? When we don't know what we think or feel often until we start speaking it. We don't have that inner dialogue that lets us really know what we think or feel about things. The way we know is through talking. So this gives that opportunity. You know, plus sanity is gained through reflection and talking about things. So when people are all chaotic and their emotions are all crazy, and you know, happens to all of us, when you can have deep, meaningful conversations, that brings you back into center, back into being grounded. Plus you discover all kinds of things about yourself and about other people. So the way it works is you have the card number cards, 1 to 6, and then you have the recharge cards. There's 400 questions, and that's 1 to 6 questions on a card. So you pick a number card. Important. Sorry, I forgot. Everybody gets 7 chips from here. And what this is, their appreciation chips. This is super important. So everybody gets 7 chips. And if you feel moved by anybody, anything anybody says or does, because there's drawing and activities as well, you give a chip, or you can give all your chips. You can give as many as you want. So when people are open and vulnerable, everybody's like throwing chips at them, and everybody's like laughing after somebody's been crying. So it's a super, super important part. Here we go. Here are the chips. Okay. So I'm going to give you a bunch of chips for all your work. Okay, David? Ready? Will you take them? This is for you, for your work. I know we haven't played the game together yet, but okay.
All right.
Okay. So it also helps people to think through things. So the question I just landed on are, what are some of the things you are determined to do to make it through difficult times in your reintegration? That might help jog a bunch of things people maybe aren't even thinking about, that, like what they're determined to do to make it through difficult times. Everybody will answer the same question. So everybody's going to learn from each other what they're doing, and they'll start getting support from each other. How did you adapt change to be able to survive prison life? Then they can talk about and begin to understand the barrier, the defenses they might have put up, the lack of, you know, love or whatever. It will help them to sort through and process a lot of the changes they went through, to help them to start transforming them. Do you feel your punishment fit your crime? A lot of people won't feel that way. Some people might. But these are all things that are super important to process with other people who are really listening to you. Because when you're holding everything inside, that's just going to explode somehow at some point in some way.
Um, and can you explain the concept of transformational communication?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so here's a question. Do you have any regrets? Why or why not? The way that that could be transformational is somebody might really get in touch with a regret of a crime that they might have committed against another person. They might have probably never had a chance to talk about it. So as they're talking about it, they might really feel deeply. They might cry. They might be able to release the pain and the self-hatred that they might feel towards themselves. And through that, other people will also give them support in that. And that's transformational. That changes things internally when you can have that experience, right? And help you to move through something that might have been holding in for decades.
Um, and the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly is trauma. Um, and I'm a huge believer that trauma is probably one of the biggest driving forces of the criminal legal system.
Mhm.
And I don't feel like overall there's an appreciation that trauma is really driving it's easy, I think, to understand that, trauma's role with victims of crime, but less easy to understand how it actually perpetuates crime. What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked obviously in these areas a lot. And if you're living in a violent project and you're seeing violence and you're hearing violence all the time, and there's all kind of um, very, very negative things going on all around you, people live in hell in some of these neighborhoods. And many, many people have lost many friends by the time they're a teenager, and it devalues human life. I mean, your own life. You don't feel like your life matters. Nobody's really paying attention to your life unless you have a caring parent or relative or somebody. But um, you know, trauma, unprocessed trauma, separates us from our own self, right? When it's not processed, it creates a block uh, from our own self. So then you can't process information. You can't learn very well. You can't remember. I mean, it's physiologically creates a lot of different physical blocks in our brains. I mean, I, I know that there's research done. I can't speak specifically, but there's research done that a traumatized brain looks very different than a quote normal brain of somebody who hasn't experienced a great deal of trauma. So there's many physiological changes that happen to people due to trauma. And then you also can't have authentic relationships when you're severely traumatized because you're not yourself, and you're separated from yourself and your own feelings and your own thoughts. So that's one of the worst. And when you don't have relationships with people, life isn't really very much worth living.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we see in a lot of these police incidents is that often, there are other factors like mental illness or, but sometimes it's really just a trauma response that, somebody barking orders at somebody triggers PTSD and all sorts of other trauma. And so, until you can get past trauma. And, I saw a stat recently, a huge percentage of people that get caught up in the prison system started out as actually victims of crime.
Mm.
It's often, relatives who are, they're on the receiving end of everything from emotional to physical to sexual abuse, and then it just multiplies.
I
Um,
wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the statistic is also 90% of the women in prison have been sexually abused as children.
yeah. So I mean, but not just women. A
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of men
yeah.
were sexually abused too, which I think is I don't want to uh, I got to be careful how I phrase this, but in some ways it's even worse because there's all sorts of other stigmas. I, I I don't think that's the way I wanted to say it, but I think you get what I was trying to
Yeah,
say.
yeah. A lot more shame. Men have more
Yeah.
shame over it. I mean, there's plenty of shame for women, but men have even more.
Right. And men also have a disincentive to ever deal with it because you know, at least, in my generation, the worst thing you could do is be seen as one of those type of guys. I hope the world's changing a little bit on that. You know, um, but I think it creates this whole level of trauma that never gets dealt with. And you just see it time after time. These kids grow up in this horrific environments. Their parents are, struggling. Some of the parents who are struggling do real well with their kids, but a lot end up, with their own trauma and their own substance abuse, and that just gets passed down to the next generation. And so we're really proliferating this, and there needs to be kind of a way to intervene and stop the trauma cycle if we want to deal with the crime cycle and the poverty cycle.
Yeah, there's a whole lot that needs to be done, and it's kind of just not really being paid attention to. I mean, right now, a lot of politicians are talking about rehabilitation. There's a lot of talk about rehabilitation. Cedric Richmond, the White House senior advisor, I'm not sure what the office is exactly, is talking about that Biden is going to earmark $5 billion for community violence interrupters. We'll see how that all comes out. Charlemagne the God is raising $100 million for mental health. I'm not sure exactly what he plans to do with that money, but so there's a lot of people trying to mobilize now. What I love about my games is that most you're not going to get most people from these areas into a therapist's office,
Right.
right? It's just not part of their experience or their desire.
Plus,
So
it's
the
hard to get
game,
into a therapist office.
yeah, it is. It is. There aren't many therapists. There aren't nearly enough therapists to begin with, or ones especially that are going to understand that experience. So counselors or just even mature people can take the games into the neighborhoods, play, start opening that up, conversations up, building those groups, building support. I it's so I'm not saying this because I invented it. Like I hope you get a chance to watch a group. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly beautiful. And inexpensive and portable, and anybody can I design them so anybody can run the groups who's mature and sensitive. The game is the therapist. Somebody just has to keep everything in line. It's very easy to do. Recharge is peer facilitated in many of the prisons very successfully. So I'm hoping to get the word out. Anybody watching who wants to contact me, please do, to help me get the word out and let people know these games are available to help with this mission that a lot of people care about.
Yeah, and I think, I think you're right on the cutting edge of this. I'm just hoping, with this current crime fear that we don't start turning back to the bad old days of, lock them up, throw away the key. I just don't think that works. And so, and I also believe that a lot of people that are in prison really don't need to be in prison.
Yeah.
They need help, they need support, they need education and job training, and they need to deal with their past trauma, but they don't need to be locked away and thrown away in a cage for decades. And so, figuring out ways that we can help people without resorting to cages, I think is the way forward.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority are in for substance abuse things and mental illness, who are, I think it's about 70% if you put those two together. So, yeah, but how it's changing that lock 'em up mentality. It's easy, right? Quote,
Yep.
easy. Yeah.
Easy, easy for us, not so much for the people on the receiving end.
Yeah, we're
Um,
not a society that has things in place to be compassionate at this time. And um, a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of work needs to be done. So we're trying to, with the game, with the video series, we're trying to bring a really humanizing lens with the awards that we want to put out there, like from the event. I'm sorry, the audience doesn't know what I'm talking about. Maybe you can edit that out. But, people need to start caring more, people in a mass way to bring pressure.
um, and then finally, we're just about out of time, so maybe talk about ways people can help facilitate this going forward, and kind of what you're hoping to do in the next year.
Okay, can you see my email there? Are you able to see it or no?
Not
Leslie
on the
Trans.
no.
Okay. Okay. So I can be reached at robinsonl3 at AOL.com. That's ROBINSONL, the number three, not the word, at AOL.com. Do you put up also information on the podcast, David?
Yeah, we can put your information on the written part of the podcast so that when
Okay.
people log on, they can have your contact info.
Okay, great. Also, the website for the game with a lot more information as well as videos is rechargethegame.com, rechargethegame.com. Please feel free to reach out to me with any suggestions, any ways you want to work. If you want to bring the game into your churches, communities, housing projects, social workers, it makes everybody's job so much easier. A lot of people don't know how they want to help and they don't know how to engage with formerly incarcerated people. So there's a lot of prison ministries that aren't doing very much because they don't quite know how to bridge that. They can use the game to engage, to run groups for healing. So the next year, we're working hard to put the Life After Time video series together, which is an intimate look, people answering questions from the Recharge game. And it deeply humanizes their experiences to anybody who watches them and lets them have a much different viewpoint of people who've been incarcerated because they really hear very personal, very I don't know, very moving answers to these questions that really show that they're not these monsters at all. And so we're working hard to humanize this population so that maybe, that to themselves as well as to the public. So maybe that can help move things forward as well as to get the game out into communities, families, donations. Um, I do have people contacting political people to hopefully get it on the agenda, to have these donated out to families for returning citizens, formerly incarcerated people to be able to play with their families, to bridge back in, to have more resilience because they'll be closer to their family members and not feel like they're out there all alone fighting the world alone with no resources. They'll feel that emotional support goes a long way. um, yeah, so a lot planned for this coming year.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. I think you're doing some really amazing work. I'm glad you had a chance to share your experience with folks. We deal so much with the other side of the criminal justice coin. It's good to learn about what people are doing to help people that are not necessarily wrongly convicted, although some of them are, but a lot aren't, and they still need support. And these types of programs, I think, are excellent in helping them forward. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. This has been
Yeah.
Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald, and join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.